Greetings, greetings, family. We are live. Welcome, welcome to another Wednesday evening for the Sister Shanice Show. I want to thank you so much as you're coming in the room for joining us. As you join us, please do hit the like button. Also, just drop us a note in the chat. Let us know where you are viewing us from. As you can see, we've got 3 of our guests in the house already. Absolutely awesome. We are going to be having a very interesting discussion and debate today. And, tell your family, tell your friends, get everybody logged on to the Sister Shanice Show. We are just getting ready to rock and roll. We'll give our audience just a couple of minutes to come through the door. Welcome, welcome as you come in. And let me just greet and welcome the guests that we have in the house. And we are expecting our brother, Dr. Abu, and our sister Sheila to be joining us as well at some point in the evening. But as you can see in the house, we have Brother Sakaya. Welcome, welcome, Brother Sakaya.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a privilege and an honor. Looking forward to your contributing to the discussion this evening. And as you can see, we've got Brother Michael in the house.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Family, we are in for an interesting debate this evening. And as you can see, we've got Brother Jomo in the house.
Sister Shanice, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an absolute delight to be linking with your audience, wherever they might be.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to contribute to the debate and the discussion that we're going to be having this evening. So, family, I can see the numbers. I can see you're coming in the house. Please do drop us a message in the chat. Let us know where you're viewing us from. What part of the world are you in? We know that we have an international audience. We have an international panel as well. So looking forward to tonight. So I can see we've got the DJ Jamaican Jam Crow in the house. Oh, welcome. And, he's saying that he's going to be shaping up our mind to rising up Marcus Messiah Garvey as well. We've got Sister Verna in the house from the Phenomenal Women group. Welcome, Sister Verna. She's saying, greetings, family. Looking forward to today's discussion. Yes, I am too. And we've got Sister Afri Jamo in the house. And she's saying, greetings, Sister Shanice and panel. Real African brothers and sisters worldwide, watching from Ghana. Lucky you. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. And we've got Lily in the house who's greeting the family as well. She's looking forward to another uplifting show today. She's watching us from the UK, or the UKKK, as I often heard being said. We've got Brother Brian in the house from Kenya. Rise up, Brother Brian from Kenya. And we've got Danny in the house for rugby. Come on, family, let us know where you are viewing us from. Okay. What I'm going to do now, I'm just going to ask each of our guests to introduce themselves to you, families. So, starting with Brother Sakaya.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters, wherever you are geographically. As you know, this afternoon response is we're addressing some of the issues raised by the former British High Commissioner to Jamaica, Mr. Asuf Hassan. And I wish to echo some of the sentiment of many Jamaicans and how inappropriate his comments were when he first arrived in Jamaica, and equally how repulsive his remarks were on his way out of Jamaica in an interview with the Daily Gleaner. First, he insulted our intelligence with his comment that we should not peer into the past. He advised on his way out that the British institutionalized system was not actively contemplating make reparation payment to Jamaica. It's simply not happening. End of quote. I'm taking two issues with the incoming and outgoing statement. For a long time, the British government and its institution want to project the image that their past crime in the Caribbean, Africa, and the rest of the Americas had nothing to do with the present socioeconomic and political and development in our societies. In other words, the past has no relationship with the present. In the teaching of the history of economics, the British will teach about the Industrial Revolution and conveniently omitted to mention the Industrial Revolution and its linkage with the enslavement of African people and plantation system in the Caribbean, and British colonization that includes stealing of a people and stealing of land.
Rise up. We are going to be going into that in a lot more detail in a little while.
Yes,
But we wanted the audience to know who you are, Brother Sakaya.
okay, my name is Sakaya Thomas. I'm the chair, the international chair of the Global African Congress. It's a Pan-African organization. Our primary focus is to fight for the reunification of African people and ensure that the resource of Africa and its diaspora is used for the benefit of Africa, and to concentrate our struggle on reparation and a just world.
Awesome. Oh, we are privileged and honored. Let's go over to Brother Jomo. And yeah, please introduce yourself, Brother Jomo, and what country you representing?
All right. Good evening to all of you in the UK. I am currently located in sunny St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Caribbean. I know you have, Sikai, you also have sun in Canada where you are, and Mike, I know you have sun where you might be, but nothing like the Caribbean sun. So, so I am delighted to be here. I am currently the chairperson of the Reparations Committee in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I was a vice chair of the Caribbean Reparations Commission until 2 years ago, and I have been a long-standing reparationist. I was one of the attorneys who was instrumental in filing the lawsuit in 2002 in the United States, where a group of African American people filed a reparation claim against 18 multinational corporations. So that was my life in the US, but now here in the Caribbean, I just continue doing the work.
Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome all the way from St. Vincent. We are delighted to have you, my brother. Can you throw some sunshine this way to the UK as well? And Brother Michael, please introduce yourself. Let us know where in the world you're from as well.
Sure. Well, thank you again, Sister Shanice, for having me. I am an associate professor of economics here in the US, and I'm a member of the Global African Congress. Unlike Brother Jomo and Brother Sakayo, I am a relative newcomer to the reparations movement, but it is a delight to be a part of it. And I am developing my knowledge as rapidly as I can by doing a lot of reading and learning from the elders, so to speak. I am actually in the United States, and it is sunny here, quite sunny, maybe as sunny as in St. Vincent. I'm sorry to disappoint my brother Jomo. But yeah, that's about it, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Likewise, likewise. And we're going to be going into the discussion in a little while, but, I think, it's fitting that we give credit to our late, great historian, Ronoko Rashidi. He has sadly passed on to join our ancestors. And, Brother Ronoko Rashidi, as most people probably know, was a historian, a writer, public speaker, and he would do trips to Egypt, and he went and visited over 100 countries researching our history. I had the pleasure of meeting him here in the UK when he came over about a year and a half ago, delivered a presentation, was doing a book signing. He was just a phenomenal historian. He's gone on to the ancestors. Let me ask my panel if they would like to maybe say a few words by way of tribute to the late, great Ronoko Rashidi.
Well, if I can jump in first.
Go ahead.
I can tell you that this brother, as you correctly said, was a phenomenal brother. He was totally and completely committed to the African story, and telling this African story, and to bring that story to the fore. And part of telling the story, it was not just um, triumphalism. He was telling the story because he wanted to ensure that people have a full appreciation for Africa's and Africans' contribution to world civilization. And he traveled the world to show that whenever you go far enough back in history, on whichever continent you go, you would meet the African presence. And for that, he did an amazing job. I am sure the ancestors had welcomed him rousingly, and he would now reside in that great pantheon of brothers and thinkers and sisters and revolutionaries who have made their contribution and gone to meet those people who cherished and fed him with their energy. We would now be able to feed off his energy and continue the good work which all of us do.
Absolutely. I would echo all that Joma just said, but I should also point out that it is my understanding that Brother Rashidi was also an anthropologist, in addition to being a historian. And he did some very novel work in actually videotaping the presence of Africans in various parts of Asia, the so-called Middle East, in Latin America, the Caribbean, and most importantly, he was able to show through his scholarly works, his books and writings and so on, that long before the Europeans came to the so-called New World, Africans had established the diaspora of Africans here. And so he was able to show how Africans developed navigational technology and so on long before the Europeans in sailing the oceans, and just to really, in his very forceful intellectual way, demonstrate the lie of Europeans that Africans are, quote unquote, uncivilized and inferior to Europeans. I'll just leave it there, but there's a lot to be said about this brother. I would go out of my way every time he was in the States, even though, of course, he's an African American, to listen to his interviews because it was such a learning experience. So, yes, that's what I would like to say.
Yeah, likewise, I'd like to echo some of the sentiments that both Michael and Kumar mentioned. I had the privilege of meeting him in Toronto, and in a very close encounter, have had some extensive discussion. And one of the things I particularly liked about him, which I thought was unique, was the approach to research. He was an active participant in the research. It wasn't merely a scholarly research, so to speak, but he get into various communities across the world and engage as much as he could with the people. And as Michael indicated, he not only has he debunked the British myth about history, but he and Ivan Van Satema, for example, talk about the existence of African people in this part of the world before the Europeans and what the Europeans have written. So he was quite a knowledgeable man. I've made his contribution, and I'm sure people like Walter Rodney and Bob Marley and King and Malcolm X would welcome him. And yes, the brother flight home. So I think you'll have some peace. Did his job. Did it well too.
Definitely.
Shay, he certainly did. And may his spirit, rise in power. And may, his wonderful, wonderful work that he leaves behind as a legend, just continue to educate generations to come. Okay, we're getting a little feedback, so I'm going to ask the speakers, all the speakers except for Sakaya, to kindly put their phone on mute, because we're going to go back to you now, Sakaya, because you wanted to do the opening. You were ready to do the opening a little while ago. So let's let you, Liz, to open up the topic for discussion today. Take it away, please, brother Sakaya.
Okay, yes. Well, as we know, what prompted this discussion is the inappropriate comment by the outgoing British High Commissioner, in which he stated that Jamaicans should not be looking into the past, and that we need to look to the future. And at the same time, and in way out, he talks about that he attempted to assert himself by saying the British institutional system was not actively contemplating making reparation payment to Jamaica. And then he went on to say it simply was not happening. I thought that was a very, very insult. And as we in the reparation movement have said, that those who have benefited from the crime of enslavement are in no position to define justice, are in no position to tell us anything about human rights. And so, I would suggest that he paid some attention and look at what the British institution that he claims do not want to pay reparation. I would suggest that he take a look at some of the action that constitute the crime against humanity that the British government have engaged in. For example, mass murder and extermination, deportation outside of the country, imprisonment without a due process, torture, rape, medical experimentation, food deprivation, and sterilization. To be so bold-faced as to look at Jamaicans and tell them they are not going to be discussing reparation is not only reinforcing the white supremacist ideology that they attempt to implement on Jamaica and other colony, but it's an insult. Again, suggesting to Jamaicans that not all Jamaicans are in support of reparation, as if to say all British people, all white people in Britain are in agreement with any one issues, and having agreed on those issues, it's what gives the issue some legitimacy. So I thought that his comment was quite repulsive, and one which we must take exception to the highest level. And so we want to respond to him appropriately and let him know that reparation is not about begging a cap in hand. It's about justice. And he is in no position, he and anybody in the British establishment who benefit from the enslavement of African people are not in a position to define justice for us. We will do it ourselves. Mute.
Take myself off mute. There we go. Thank you so much for that opening, Brother Sikaya. I'd have to absolutely agree with you on the points that you were making there indeed. And, family that's watching, as some of you may or may not know, the Jamaican government decided that it was going to petition the British for 7 billion in reparations payment for the crimes that have been committed against our ancestors, for enslaving us and for carrying out all of the atrocities that my brother, was just mentioning. And as we know, the country was the whole of Europe was hugely enriched as a result of our enslavement. It was the raw materials and the produces of the enslaved Africans, that industrialized the whole of Europe and America. And so, Jamaican government thought, well, it's about time you paid us some reparations. Okay, we're part of Caricom. We've got this 10-point plan, and, we are going it together, but we're going to be petitioning in you for this. And as my brother was saying, the British High Commissioner came out and basically dismissed the claim. Our brother said, that was well out of order, something along those lines. Have to agree with you on that. Let's bring in our brother Jomo, shall we, to contribute to this discussion on reparations. Please take yourself off mute, brother Jomo, and jump in.
All right. Look, Sikaya has set the pace, and I think that he's absolutely right. It's not the first time that this UK High Commissioner has made these disparaging comments. I think a few years ago, when he got to Jamaica, he made similar disparaging comments on the precise issue of reparations for African people. But this comes in a long line of British officials. You may recall back in 2016, 2017, former British Prime Minister David Cameron dismissed the issue of reparations in a similar fashion. Cameron, like the British High Commissioner, said, we are prepared to look forward We don't want to go back. But the evidence is clear, though. We don't have to go very far back to see the evidence and the legacies of slavery. But we could take the British themselves, because when the British were thinking about compensation for slavery back in 1830, they decided to borrow 20 million pounds. They borrowed 20 million pounds, not to pay the enslaved, but to pay the enslavers. And that 20 million pounds was paid. And the historians, economic historians, tell us that that 20 million pounds amounted to about 40% of the UK budget at that time. But significance for us in terms of history and time are not looking back. The British took from 1830, so that's 70 years to 1900, then another 100 years to 2000, and then 15 more years. So they took about 185 years to pay off that loan that they took back in 1830. And they'd never finished paying that money until 2015.
Wow.
So how could anyone talk about slavery being in the past when the British themselves, who were making a recompense to the enslavers, the plantation owners, the people who held our people as chattel and treated them in the worst ways, as Sikaya has cited, how could they now tell us that this is in the past when they were dealing with that past as recently as 2015? So we have to reject that out of hand.
Absolutely agree with you. Did you say it took them 180 years?
185 years.
185 years.
They finished paying in 2015.
Such was the extent of the loan. And, you know, this payment was obviously going to the descendants of those enslavers who are still, you know, living among us today and enjoying the benefits, the financial benefits of the wickedness and the evilness of their forefathers.
But my sister, we have to remember that the $20 million was paid to the owners of enslaved Africans in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
But the British borrowed the money, I think, from the Rothschild Bank. That they borrowed that $20 million to pay. And then they took that 185 years to pay it off. But another thing that I found out, and I found out only recently, based on the research of that outstanding Caribbean economic historian, Dr. Hilary Beckles, who heads up the Caribbean Reparations Commission, is that in all of the early years when I was in school, we were told that $20 million were paid to the enslavers. But when Dr. Beckles went and did the research in the archives, in 1830, the British parliamentarians actually agreed to pay the enslavers $47 million.
Wow.
But we know that the Emancipation Day came on August 1st, 1834, but enslaved Africans in the Caribbean who had been doing what they were doing for generations, for decades, were told, look, you have to act as an apprentice for 4 more years. So they worked from 1834 to 1838. And that apprentice period was to allow the enslavers to get an additional 27 million pounds.
Yeah.
So that's what that's about. So the crime is so bare, it's so raw. Anyone who tells us we must forget the past don't really know what they're talking about. Because amazingly, Jewish people say, never forget, never again.
That's
But
right.
we are told that we must forget and move on. And we got nothing. Jewish people got Jewish people who suffered the horror for 6 years,
Mm-hmm.
got billions of dollars and continue to get billions of dollars, but they're still saying, never forget, never again.
Mm-hmm.
Our horror went on for 400 years, and they're telling us, small thing, forget that, move on, pull yourselves up by the bootstrap because we got no money. And this is why we are saying the struggle for reparations is a struggle for power fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we have to break the back of white supremacy to allow us the chance to break through, to show that our cause is a just cause, and that in time we are going to climb over the mountain and stand supreme because reparations is right and reparations is just.
Absolutely. Reparations is right and just indeed. Let's bring back Brother Sakaya to comment on the contributions to the discussion so far, and we'll put our phones back on mute so that we don't get any feedback.
Well, absolutely. As Jomo indicated, one of the incredible things from Henry Becker's most recent research, as he is correctly said, they have taught us in school that nobody knew about that, what happened between 1834 and 1838. That period, so-called period of apprenticeship, was exclusively for additional money to pay the planter class because they themselves were not satisfied with what was initially agreed to. And then having done that, and get engaged in this massive self-aggrandizement, they turn around and tell us, the descendant of Africans, where they have left a society, they created world poverty, and then manage the process and tell us that we have no demand for justice. And Jomo, if I may comment, what I thought is very interesting, one of the excuses that the British government have used recently is they were asking, and a lot of black folks was asking the question to Unforgiving them, well, where's the money going to be coming from to pay us for reparation? But I hope you take note that during the corona pandemic crisis, that they had no problem borrowing trillions and trillions of dollars. The same people were telling us where's the money coming from, and many black folks feel sorry for them. Well, their treasury is going to be broke. I remember being in Holland, and somebody was saying, well, you can't be asking for so much money because the treasury, the white fear took over. Black people sorry for white people. How are they going to pay it? Well, look, suddenly with the coronavirus, that fear no longer exists. So again, for us, is a question of justice, and we cannot take our foot off the gas. It's about justice.
Yes, it is indeed, because, a comment was made, pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. And that's what the Americans were told, weren't they, straight after they were freed. Pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. And they did just that. And we had Black Wall Street. That's what they managed to accomplish. And we all know the story of what happened to Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street became the most successful city probably across the country at the time. There was black millionaires. They were driving the latest cars. They had their own banks, their own cinemas, hundreds of businesses, hotels, everything. They were getting on, doing quite fine all by themselves in their own city. So, although there is the demand for reparations, we're not suggesting that, we can't do for ourselves. But as you said, reparations basically, plus an apology for the atrocities that were committed and the crimes that were committed against us is what we would expect, during these civilized times from the descendants of these people, as, a show of recompense for what happened. And, this is a demand that I feel and agree is a just demand and a right demand. In fact, here in the UK, just on Sunday, we were out protesting for reparations on the 1st of August, which we call the 1st of Messiah every year. We all gather in our numbers and in our colors. Some years we've had thousands, other years we've had hundreds of our people come out onto the streets and, demand reparations. We're very much keeping the demand for reparations alive over here. Let me go around and find out, the extent to which the people on the ground in the country where you are actually, keeping the demand for reparations alive. We know it's happening at an organizational level. What's happening at the grassroots level, please, my brother Sikaya?
A lot is happening. People are more organized. That people are getting very, very, very conscious, and a number of events recently, I think, really illustrate the frustration and expose white supremacy at a higher level. And I want to speak specifically of the George Floyd murder by the police. As we could see, there's a worldwide reaction demanding justice, the end of police killing, not just in the United States. And Michael could speak more eloquently about that because he has seen it firsthand. But there's demand globally against police brutality. And of course, when we look at the COVID-19, it really exposed the naked nature of the structural inequality in the world. Like between yesterday and today, the Canadian government, for example, are dumping vaccine. No, whether or not you believe in taking the vaccine is not the issue. There are many different opinions, and everybody have the right to hold their own independent opinion, whether they think you should take vaccine or don't take vaccine. That's not the point. The point is, here's these white countries who are talking about teaching the world about democracy and equality. They refuse to make it available to a lot of countries, and so much so that the vaccine has to go through a particular process, leave certain temperature. It has to be in a certain temperature before it distributes for pharmaceutical company. Once again, pharmaceutical company is not used, it's of no use, and millions of that is being thrown away by Canada that still pretend to be a friend of Caricom, for example. So we are up against a situation where some people are currently describing as vaccine apartheid. And people are reacting to those kind of situations. Black people are coming out more in droves. People who I know were not prepared to engage in the discussion about reparation is asking when is it coming and what can I do? So there's a growing increase, intensification of interest and activity, and I think it's only going to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, if I may butt in, so to speak.
Yes, yes, please do.
Brother Jomo, for example, as well as Brother Sikaya, spoke about the presence, and you alluded to it as well, Sister Shanice, spoke about the presence of slavery in today's society. Jomo spoke about it in the context of the British government 6 years ago or so finished repaying the payment they made to the enslavers of 20 million pounds. But it's deeper than that for Black people around the world, and certainly in the Caribbean and Latin America, because we have the structural presence of slavery today, or the legacy of it, the underdevelopment and its allied manifestations, the poverty, the misery. I mean, Black people in many parts of the Caribbean and Latin America, and by the way, in Africa as well, still many hundreds of thousands of them still live in huts. Many are homeless. The schools for many Black children are very dilapidated, right here in the United States as well, compared to their white counterparts. There is hunger, structural hunger, etc. Now, all of these things are the direct result of the legacy of slavery. No doubt about that. So, as it relates to the comments of the British High Commissioner, the outgoing British High Commissioner, there are two things that struck me about his comments. First and foremost, they were very ignorant comments because he asked two very stupid questions. Who should be paid? And who should make the payments? Well, it's pretty obvious who should be paid. It is the Afro descendants of the enslaved Africans. And that can be easily done if there's a political will to do it. And who should do the payment? Very simply put, all those who benefited from slavery. The bankers who bankrolled the slave trade and slavery, the insurance companies, the shipping companies, the steel companies, and on one could go, right? They were the beneficiaries. And those who are dead, many of them, maybe all of them are dead by now, but their inheritors are still with us.
Oh, yeah.
And they have inherited hundreds of billions of pounds, and they're still making investments upon top of such investments. So reparations, as my two brothers indicated earlier, are more than justified, and the money is there for it. After the 2009 or 2008, I'm sorry, collapse of the global capitalist system, or near collapse, the Federal Reserve Bank guaranteed $14 trillion to bail out Wall Street. These, I mean, Sakaya spoke about the COVID borrowings, $14 trillion. How could these people possibly say they don't have the resources to make the payment? And by the way, a second thing I found with the comments of the outgoing High Commissioner is that his statements, his arguments are completely baseless. The slave trade and slavery occurred for 400 long years. Under international law, wrongs must be righted. And the slave trade and slavery were wrongs that were done to African humanity. And the reparations must be paid for those wrongs. Okay? So the guy's comment, and it's very sad to see, it was an Indian or a man of Indian ancestry, it seems, who was used to literally justify the non-payment to African people of reparations. Pretty sad. You cannot have oppression, it's very apparent, without having some of the oppressed participating in their own oppression. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Let's go over to Brother Jomo for some comments, further comments in response to what has been presented by Brother Sikaya and Brother Michael. What say you, Brother Jomo? Please take yourself off mute.
I think Mike and Sikaya made some very, very important points. But I want to lead off on Mike's point, which he calls unfortunate that this British High Commissioner is of Indian extraction. Well, we all know that this is nothing new. Nothing new at all. As those brothers and sisters and Sikaya would know, because he was at the World Conference, United Nations World Conference Against Racism in Johannesburg in 2001. And the story is told that there was this charming African woman of African extraction leading the British team to say to African people across the world, well, guess what? That's in the past. We're not going to pay you any reparations because at the time, slavery was fully and completely legal. But they all know it's a lie. And the lie stands from the fact that the British themselves couldn't, they said, well, you can't bring it here. But you see these lands we control in the Caribbean, you could keep it there. And the fact that they did that is demonstrative of their understanding of the illegality of what they were doing. So they couldn't bring it. But if we look at the US delegation at the 2001 conference, Colin Powell was there. Condoleezza Rice was there. Very important Black figures fronting for white supremacy. Because fundamentally, that's what it is. That to say that you putting Black people up as persons who would not be for reparations, it's a long history. And we could even go back and take this deeper to the persons who were instrumental in conniving with white supremacy and imperialism to kill off Black leaders. Thomas Sankara was betrayed by his deputy compere. Lumumba was betrayed by people like Tishambi and others. And the story goes on and on. We know that some of the Malcolm X's top bodyguard was said to be an agent of the FBI. And the story goes on and on. So it's not in any way unique that sometimes the faces who confront us the hardest are the people who look like us. And this is why some people have said that we go forward in this struggle not knowing precisely whom we are standing arm to arm with. Because the person who is next to you, who you think is holding up your back and standing to defend the rear, is the person you may have to look and say, "E too, Brutus? You too are coming at me?" So, but we have to just understand this and move forward confident in the view that we are going to win this battle, that we are going to win this war. And as the great Guyanese poet says, John Carew, it's John Carew or Martin Carter says, we are so confident that if we don't see the victory, our children would see it. And if our children don't see it, our great-grandchildren would see it. But we are confident in the expression that victory belongs to us. And I think that's the spirit in which we need to go forward.
They feel so strong to say we are weak, Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ashe. So let me go over to the chat room now, and let's pick up on some of the comments, and then I'll invite the speakers in turn to respond to the comments. And if you can put your phones on mute, please. There's feedback from somewhere. And so let's go to the comments, and let me put this one to Brother Sikaya first. Self-emancipation says, we need to stop depending on the same, we need to stop depending on someone's claim to be, sorry, I need to put on my glasses really, hang on, let's get it. We need to stop depending on someone's claim to be the oppressors and let them go to where they belong with their money. Okay, so basically I think he's saying we shouldn't be depending on the money from the oppressors. Let them go where they're going with their money. His title is Self-emancipation. So I think he's saying we need to do for self. What say you to members of our community with that perspective, please, Brother Sakaya?
I think it's a misconception. I think it's a misconception about go with the money. I mean, we're talking about the history of economic development. What does that mean by their money? It's not their money. The money they have is unpaid wages. You know, money, the wealth that was created by our ancestors. And when we say that the reparation, we're demanding reparation and self-reparation, we still have a lot of work to do. Because a lot of the things that we have to do is to debunk many of the myth we have to do a lot of re-education, rehabilitation, and understand white supremacy and its ideology. We have to understand white epistemology and how it convey a certain level of whiteness. The notion that their money, what does that mean? What is their money? They're talking about wealth created by us. Europeans are not genius. White people are not intellectually and genetically superior, so they have a great deal of wealth, and white nations are wealthy, and the black nations in the global south, the Caribbean and Africa are poor. It is so because it is stolen legacy, it's stolen money, and it's stolen wealth. And so it's not their money, it's our money that we're putting a claims to. And the way they organize the world, through its military means, through the United Nations, through the World Bank, to the International Trade Organization, and use these instruments to reinforce the structural inequality. Many of our people misunderstand and have not taken the time to study these institutions, see how they function, in whose interests they function, how they will cooperate. And because we are pushed on the outside, they think that's where we belong. No, that's not where we belong. It's our wealth. And so what we are doing is demanding our wealth. And part of the self-repair is understanding that role in which we live.
In addition to what Sikaya says, which is absolutely correct, I would just like to add something else. And it is this. If you really think about it at a deeper level, the European enslavers are getting away with a discount. Because how do you put a price on the lashes that slaves got? What's the price of each lash if a slave gets 40 lashes for running away or for disobeying the so-called master? What's the price on the rape of a slave woman? And sometimes repeated rapes. What's the price of stabbing a slave woman in her pregnant stomach, killing the fetus? On and on one could go. What's the price of throwing a runaway enslaved African into boiling oil? On and on one could go. So these things are not factored into the reparations payments, which is something that I think increasingly we in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world must begin to do some serious calculations of, because I don't think we are have sufficiently accurate calculations of our reparations demands as yet. In the United States, for example, there are several different numbers. I was just looking at some of them today. Expressed in 2018 dollars, there is one figure of $14 trillion. I've seen another one for $19 trillion. I have seen for between 12 and $13 trillion. I've seen one that is the highest I've seen so far, $6.2 quadrillion. 1 quadrillion is the number 1 and 15 zeros behind it. Okay? So how do you arrive at these different numbers? Well, because of the complexities of doing the calculations and what are the factors you are including in the calculation. Unpaid wages, landlessness, all kinds of things like this. And so I don't see similar kinds of calculations in the Caribbean as yet. So long story short, what I'm trying to say is, if you really think about it, given that those different factors that I mentioned don't have a price tag to them, because you can't have a price tag. How do you put a price tag on the indignities of slavery? If you think about it, the Europeans are getting away with a discount.
We hear you on that. You know, how can we put a price, you know, on what we went through as a people? Looking at comments in the chat. And just to remind you all, please do give us a thumbs up on the way in. Please do, so that, you know, this discussion can go far and wide. The more likes it gets, the more likely it is for others to be able to see this particular discussion. Right, so let's go over to the chat and see what some of our brothers and sisters are saying in there. I saw some of the comments earlier and people were saying we should never forget. Absolutely true. We should never forget. You know, we should remind our children of what we went through as well. Agree with you on that, because, you know, my fear is if we forget, then we might not realize when we're walking back into the same situation again. And if we forget the lessons of our history, then history will come back around so that we learn the lessons again and again until we learn from them. So absolutely agree. We must not forget. People in the chat was agreeing, how can we put a price on the lynchings, the rapes, the buggery and everything else that was happening? You know, we can't put a price on it. Agreeing with you on that. There are a couple of others in the chat, though, on the other end of the discussion, who was saying that like there's a difference between money and wealth. They may give us some money today, but they could devalue that money tomorrow. And that's obvious because, you know, they control the economy, they control the current system. I mean, they're devaluing the wealth of the Caribbean and African countries now within their economic system. So what's to stop them doing that at the moment that they were to give us some reparations? And I think the point about wealth is recognizing the fact, and there were some mentions about technology, recognizing the fact that as Africans and as Caribbeans, we are wealthy. The land that we own or supposedly own is where the wealth comes from. Let's go around the room and have a bit of the discussion about the difference between money and wealth and why we were going for money and maybe not pursuing. I'm not suggesting that we're not actually, but I put it out there. And why not focusing on, you know, technologically advancing the Caribbean and Africa and our countries, utilizing the wealth that we've got in order to do so, to create our own wealth. Let's put that out there because, you know, addressing this question will help to, I think, respond to those who are saying, forget reparations, let's take advantage of the minerals and resources that we've got right now, maybe even separate ourselves and do for self. Let's go around the room. Let's this time start with our brother Jomo regarding the other side of the arguments on this.
All right, that's a good way to pose it. Money and wealth, and this argument is anticipated and is well anticipated, and this is why the Caribbean Reparations Commission came up with a 10-point program, because the 10-point program not only talks about money, it talks about repair. So it talks, for example, about an apology, then it talks about indigenous repair, to repair indigenous people, because when the Europeans came in 1800, it was estimated that you had about 200 million indigenous people. Currently, in 2000, we don't have 2 million. So the genocide was immense. And this is why part of the reparations, 10-point Caribbean reparations plan is to repair. Then we talk about technology transfer is one of the points in the plan. We talk about debt forgiveness is one of the points in the plan. Repatriation of brothers and sisters who may want to go back to the motherland as part of the plan. History and archaeological cultural institutions that imbue our people with a sense of self and a sense of knowledge of their history and their conquering attitudes and policies. All of those are part of the plan. So this reparations effort is not simply for a paycheck. In fact, in the Caribbean, the idea is that we ought to have a developmental dialogue with the former enslavers to ensure that they do a whole host of things that will help in the further advancement and development of the Caribbean. When the British left Jamaica, for example, there was little or no, you had like a functional illiteracy rate of 70%. And that ran across the Caribbean. But Jamaica was the single most important English colony in the world. The British said so, not me. In the same way in which Haiti was the single most important colony for the French. In the 16th and 17th and 18th century, the Caribbean was said to be the most prized piece of real estate in the world because of the wealth that it generated and the use that wealth was put to in the development, the further development of the Industrial Revolution and the societies in Europe. So we are not just simply asking for monetary contributions and award. We are asking for a systemic and continuous input, because we cannot allow the European enslavers to walk away from the scene of the crime. In fact, the Caribbean view, as Dr. Beckles says it all the time, is to have the British come back to the scene of the crime and to see that after all of these years, that there's still blood on the ground and there's still pain and still suffering, so that out of that, they can have an appreciation why we are asking for all of these things. And it is not just money. There are all of these other things that we need to do to ensure that our people are made whole. But it is important for us to understand that if we get not a single cent, but we can emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and have an appreciation for our contribution to the civilizations of the world, we would be in a good position to take our societies from where they are and to carry on in the advancement. So those persons who are talking about, okay, separate, let's use our resources, but we have to emancipate ourselves first, because there's something called imperialism and neocolonialism. And if we just have people and throw them out there, the imperialists and the neocolonialists would deal with them and create all kind of betrayals in our societies, which would not redound to the benefit of the people. So we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, but we also have to make a strong and forceful demand for reparatory justice.
Absolutely. And, you know, if I may just follow that, well said, Brother Jomo, brilliant. You know, first of all, the notion that we have our resources is a contestable one, because the resources are in our soils. Of course they are there, but do we own them? Who controls them? Who uses them for their own development? It is not Jamaica, it is not St. Vincent, it is not Guyana, etc. It is the imperialists, as Brother Jomo alluded to a while ago. And so that in and of itself is a mythology, and it relates to the point that Brother Jomo makes about the emancipation of our minds from mental slavery. Because even to think that we have those resources is laughable. But the broader point that the brother made about the modality, or at least one of the modalities of repairing the injustices that the European enslavers inflicted on African peoples in Africa itself, in the Caribbean, Latin America, and elsewhere, is critical, because we are the notion that we want money, that everybody's going to get a check, presumably, is a very narrow, a very parochial definition of reparations. That is not even the main thought, because one of the analyses I saw of reparations for African Americans is that each African American, and I think this number was $14 trillion worth of reparations. Each African American, if you figure 40 million or so African Americans, would get about $151 million. All right? No, that's per capita, of course. That's not the main thing. There are many different ways, as Brother Joma said, that we can be repaired. For example, we can have student debt canceled. We can have investments in schools and better quality education. We can have our real history be taught. We can demand that a history of our people that will actually emancipate our minds from mental slavery. We can have grants for affordable homes for Afro-descendants. We can have grants for businesses. That is, we don't have to pay back those things. There are lots of ways, and again, as Brother Joma suggested quite rightly, and as Brother Hilary Beckles elaborated on in our recent conference, the British need to be in this for the long haul, just like the French and the Americans, may I add, in Haiti, to actually finance the development of our countries that they've plundered. That's mainly what we are talking about, the ill health of our people that emerged out of the womb of slavery with bad food, diabetes, and heart problems, and so on. Where do we think all this was coming from? We didn't have those problems in Africa. The merge in slavery. And those things must be repaired. So it's not about money. It's about development. Thanks.
Yes, I myself echo those sentiments. And you see, the reparation discussions have just begun. It's multiple faceted, it's multidimensional. And one of the important things why we're going to have institutional building is to talk about the decolonization of the mind, the decolonization of our community. I'm talking about decolonization of our community, where, for example, there are some people who felt that we could live inside of a world, and because the Europeans have engaged in the crime that they do, that we should engage in it, have any kind of a relationship with them at all. Not so. We talk about technological transfer. Well, where's research and development? Why is it some of our best scientists, for example, and our best brains, be it on the Africa and the continent, live in the metropolis? I mean, we have seen some example that since the COVID-19, a whole host of well-educated professionals are leaving the continent of Africa and coming to these parts of the world as refugees. Why? Because the fragility of our economy, the fragility of our institution, the structural weakness of our institution. So reparation, yes, we are right. Reparation is just not about a check, but it's a long-term developmental need. Another important part of the reparation that has to be looking at more fundamental is what happened to our family. For example, what happened when the trade in Africa completed and the European wanted additional labor force to continue the production? What happened with having men leave the plantation just for reproductive purposes? What happened to us when men or women have no right to the family? What happened to the notion of family as being property? Have we deconstructed that? Have we thought about that? Have we looked at the present contemporary manifestation, intergenerational trauma in our own family and where that is coming from? The envy we have towards each other, which many of us can't even stand each other's success. All of those are a critical piece of the debate that we must get into if we are to truly talk about repair. There's no point of hiding these manifestation, destructive manifestation, as if it's not happening. We've seen it in our organization, we see it in our family, we see it in people we engage with all the time. So this is a huge monumental task. And for that reason, we can even begin to think of a time, what some of the institution of repair, what it will look like, how long it will look like, who's going to design it, and the kind of energy that it will take to do so. So it's a long, multi-pronged approach for a long period of time to talk about the repair.
Shay, huge amount of repair that's needed indeed. And, you know, so we've heard about the Caricom 10-point plan. It's more than just compensation, so much more. But as you can see, family, we've got our sister Sheila in the house. I've missed her story already. So welcome, sister Sheila. Take yourself off mute and do greet the family. Oh, I think our sister might have frozen. Okay, we'll come back to Sister Sheila once her computer allows her to join us. I am expecting Dr. Abu as well. He did let me know that he was going to be joining us a bit late. Okay, I think our sister has unfrozen. Welcome, Sister Sheila. We're having challenges with your line tonight.
I give thanks to be here. I am in the middle of nowhere in England, so my network is
oh, we're gonna have, yeah, we're having a little challenge. I think there's a major delay on our sister's line. You might want to try and log out and log back in again and hope that we get a better connection. But we gather that you're in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, even though she's in the UK, I think are you in the UK though? Okay, she's gonna come back with us. So we're experiencing some of the challenges that our brothers and sisters tend to experience on the continent all the time, our sister being in the middle of nowhere. And this is what, to some extent, we're talking about as well. You know, the extent to which the continent has been, you know, held back from developing industrially, technologically, scientifically, culturally, etc. 400 years of devastation, and prior to that 1,500 years of Arab enslavement as well. And for those of us who are familiar with our history will know that on the continent there were great empires, Monomatapa Empire, Benin Empire, the Songhai Empire. There were many empires, many great cities and kingdoms that were destroyed as a result of the invasions, a succession of invasions that we experienced as Africans. We were doing fine all by ourselves prior to the invaders initially coming in as traders, fooling us into believing that they wanted to trade with us, when in fact all they had their eye on was our wealth. And then us as a free labor force. And, you know, off of the back of our suffering and the genocide, you know, as we said at the outset, the Western part of the world and America, as we can see today, has developed, you know, beyond recognition of what it was at the time when we had our great empires and cities. So on one hand, Africa has been totally destroyed. And, you know, to a large extent, you know, we as a people have been significantly impacted by the 400 years of enslavement. And on the other hand, the Western world has developed. And so today, those of us who are even streaming live, you know, from Western countries, we've got perfect, you know, internet, you know, or almost perfect internet. But those, you know, brothers and sisters of ours, when they try and join us from the continent, you know, even their internet services is compromised, yet the wealth and the minerals and the resources to make all of this available comes from the continent itself. So, you know, there needs to be major changes indeed. We've heard about the 10-point plan. It's more than just, compensation. There's debt cancellation, repatriation. There's a whole package. Yes, indeed. But there's some members in the group in the chat. There's two schools of thought. Now, do we, going forward, in terms of our demand for reparations, are we looking to continue within the current Eurocentric system of economy, of their economic system, their legal system, their education system, etc.? Are we looking to continue within the current structures, or are we looking to go back to as we were before, the days of old, when we were doing for self, when we had our own kingdoms, our own empires? Do we want to, say goodbye to the 400 years plus of enslavement and then colonization and now neo-colonialism? Are we saying enough is enough? Leave us alone, let us get on with doing for self? Or are we, in terms of the perspective on reparations, where you're coming from, my brothers, saying that, we want the money to spend within the existing economy, but to spend it on developing, within their existing matrix systems. But, what is it are we saying? And we're going to come to that in just a while. Let me allow Sister Sheila to try and introduce herself again. Let's see if the connection allows her to do so. Welcome, Black, my sis. Let's hope we got a better.
Grand rising, grand evening, my people. Can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you loud and clear this time.
I start by giving thanks, and I also start by saying I am somewhere in England whereby the network is not very different from the network in the continent. So let not people look down upon us in Africa for having poor network. It is everywhere, including the suburbs of England. I give thanks for this day, for having this important discussion. And even as I talk with no confidence that I'm not frozen yet. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Or do I get frozen? Anyway, it's an honor to speak, and I'm just catching up on the conversations. And it's very, very important that we have these conversations, especially about righting the wrongs that have been done to us. When I just joined, I found Brother Thomas talking about the issues we have amongst ourselves as an African people. It's very important to talk about these issues, because sometimes we focus so much on ourselves without any externals. So, Brother Thomas, thank you very much, because amongst ourselves there's a lot of pain and a lot of heartache and a lot of negative energy and a lot of bad will.
Oh, Sister Sheila,
very,
we're going to have to come back to you, my sis. Unfortunately, the line is breaking up so badly. It's difficult for us to hear what you're saying. We're kind of getting a drift, but we're not hearing you properly. The line is breaking up. We've lost our Sister Sheila, but as you can see, we've got Dr. Abu in the house. Welcome, Dr. Abu.
Good family, and rise up to the fellow panel members, rise up all the time.
Budum, rise up, Dr. Abu. I don't know if you were able to follow some of the debates whilst you were not with us.
No, brilliant. I'm telling you, well said. Them all. They talk on my behalf. I don't know if anyone else, but they talk on my behalf. But it's one thing we have to realize. We have to prepare ourselves for reparation. And we can't repair ourselves in reparation and then go wash in the blood of Jesus. Those are the part of things that we have to let go all of them things. A lot of those things with them, those narratives, can't work without reparation. We have to let go these European narrative and find our own source side. You understand? No matter what political or economic we have, if we don't have our own African spirituality in it, no use. No use. So I give thanks to all the panel member them, you know, for their contribution, because these are the information that should be in the school in the Caribbean. You understand? These are the information that should be Sunday morning coming from the pulpit. And this is form of opposition that we're gonna be up against. The European them gonna step back and make we fight amongst ourselves. That's why they could send that coolie man to Jamaica. You understand, you know? We have a case against the European. So no one else, no China, no Arabs, no Indian, no African must stand on behalf of the European. He come to court himself and him have to give account for it. And I will never support no African who come talking on behalf of the European. This is we're looking at what we call Tizzlewood, Hector. We have a lot of Hector in these modern days that will beat their own African brother. Because you said a lot of us, we are suffering, you know, we are addicted to white privilege. A lot of us are a junkie to white privilege and will murder one another for that privilege. You understand? So once again, I give thanks to all the panel members and you, Sister Shanice, for a brilliant topic that should be not seasonal, but an everyday conversation on our lips.
Vudum, rise up, Dr. Abu, as always. Thank you for your contribution to the discussion. So we have to Lego, enough things we have to Lego to get back into our African minds and our African self, you know, because these are the things that is getting in the way of our progress, says Dr. Abu, our addictiveness to whiteness, you know. And I think, and it touches on the question that I was asking, you know, because as we know, if we look at the teachings of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, for example, you know, he was very much a separatist, wasn't he? He was saying that, you know, as African people, you know, we need to build our own nations, you know, and we touched on the Black Wall Street earlier, which was an attempt by Africans to build their own nation within somebody else's backyard, you could say. And, you know, look at what happened there. So when we talk about reparations, we know it's not all about money, but if we don't benefit, but our great-great-grandchildren do, when they do eventually agree to make some reparations payment, you know, what is the message from us to our great-great-grandchildren about how, you know, that compensation should be spent, where it ought to be spent? You know, these are really important messages that need to be going down the line with the debate and the discussion that we're having about reparations. Some in the chat are saying, you know, we should be looking to Africa to build Africa. We should be looking to tax, you know, any country that wants any of the resources and minerals from Africa. We have to pay tax quite heavily. Petrol's heavily taxed here. Why can't they heavily tax, you know, for their own minerals and resources? You know, should we be focusing on rebuilding our kingdoms and our empires on the continent and in the Caribbean and those countries that we can call our own? Or do we want to, you know, continue sending the message to our children and our great-grandchildren that they should try and build a home here in the West? Some of the panel members from Canada, some are in America, some here in the UKKK. What is the message for our great-grandchildren as far as you're concerned, Brother Sikaya? Let's go around the room. By the way, people in the chat are commenting on the resemblance between yourself, Brother Sikaya, and Brother Michael. They think there's a very strong resemblance. In fact, you know, you look like twins. So is there a blood relationship there by any chance?
Well, who knows?
I want to speak to my dad.
That's right.
And I can't speak to him, unfortunately,
That's
because
right.
I lost him.
Same here, same here.
I tell you,
but who knows?
this is what happened during our enslavement.
Indeed,
you know, brothers
indeed.
and sisters were separated. Some ended up in the Caribbean, some ended up in America, you know, some different parts of the world. And this is why, you know, someone could need some bone marrow in the UK and they find a match in America. So, I mean, and brothers, you know, you could have been brought together. You could be, you know, related in some way, but the resemblance is very striking indeed. But anyway, Brother Sakaya, let's go back to you. What are the messages that we ought to be giving to our great-grandchildren who may well be the beneficiaries of the works that we're doing today?
That reparation must be seen in multi-dimensional way. You know, there's no one aspect of reparation that is mutually exclusive. It's multidimensional. We need to conceptualize reparation in the context that enslavement was over 400 years. Over 400 years. That's a long time, right? And yes, you know, all of us who are reparation activists and social justice, campaign for social justice, we are impatient to see the result. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and recognize that it's a long journey. This is ultimately a destination. It's going to be a long time that we have to set new path, a new development structure. So reparation, the mission of reparation would not be accomplished unless we have social and economic transformation. So we have to begin to envision a different kind of society. We have to begin to envision a different kind of institution. Brother Dr. Abu spoke about religion. What kind of religion? What are we? Walter Rodney make the point that there's certain parts of our culture we will never be able to recapture because it is destroyed. But what can we recreate? What are the lessons that we have learned as a result of enslavement, as a result of colonization? And what can we reconstruct to model or to better advance the struggle of our people? So the task of reparation, I'm afraid, I get nervous when people begin to talk about the end result. We don't know what the research and development, where it's going to take us when we go to Africa, what needs to be done in terms of the social economic transformation of Africa. Let's, for example, take the Congo that has, for example, about 96% of coltrane that is used in the cell phone industry. So let's take that one industry. Now let's take a better one that I like to talk about more. Let's talk about, for example, chocolate that in West Africa produce cocoa. How are we going to take the cocoa that West Africa produce, recognize that the Dutch, a number of European economies exclusively dependent on this raw material, but how can we take that cocoa in West Africa and transform that society? And so we could have the chocolate is produced in Africa, and we know most Europeans are in this part of the world, people are chocolate junkie. So there's a demand for chocolate. But how can we set up research and development institute? How are we going to train our engineers? How are we going to build those institutions that we transform that cocoa into chocolate and the multiply effect and the economy that we will have right across not just West Africa, but right across the continent or the diaspora, because we're looking at our skills. We're looking at how we utilize those skills. We're looking at how we transform the society. So those are some heavy work that's ahead of us when we begin to talk about reparation. And I would hope that as the reparation debate continue, that we begin to put our head to the table and to begin to recognize the complexity and the challenges ahead of us that needs to be done. The technological research, the technological development, the research and development institution has to be built. So it's a whole vast of work that still has to be done. And all I could say, my sister, is that there's many of the skills that is in Europe would have to go back to Africa. The technology allows that we could probably stay in England today and do some research and development, and technological transfer would make it available in Africa, could be utilized in any one way or the other to advance the agenda. But I'm saying What I'm saying is that we have to envision a different kind of a world, not the world that we have now.
Rise up. Yes, we need to envision a different world, and it may well be with advising our great-grandchildren to go back to Africa
Yes, indeed.
to build, yes, there. So do the research and development now and start putting in place the factories, you know, the
Indeed,
manufacturing companies on the continent.
Indeed,
That's
indeed.
needed to turn these raw materials into finished goods.
Indeed.
I'm sure there are many chocolate makers amongst our people in America, in the Caribbean. You know, we need to be scaling up. Absolutely agree with that. We haven't heard from Brother Jomo for a little while. Let me just jump over to Brother Jomo. What are the messages you think that we ought to be giving to our great-grandchildren who may well be the beneficiaries, my brother, of reparations, so that we're clear about the direction of travel that we ought to be going in? Please take yourself off mute. Let's hear from our brother Jomo, all the way from St. Vincent and St. Vincent and what is it? The Grenadines.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Listen, I want to take off from where Brother Abu left off, because I think part of the process of going forward is that we would need to unlearn a lot of things that we believe we know, that we think we know. And we have to develop an Africa-centered knowledge system, drawing on the best of all cultures, but keeping an Africa-centered knowledge system as the anchor on which we move. Because a lot of what we know now comes from a Eurocentric understanding of the world. And if we have an appreciation for the fact that Europe only emerged as a major world system in the last 500 years, we will come to an appreciation that there's a long history before Europe became dominant. And this is why some of our leaders, like and our historians and our intellectual giants, like Ivan van Sertima, told the European young man who denied that the pyramids, the ancient pyramids, were not built by Africans and said that they were built by Europe. Dr. Ivan van Sertima says, okay, let's go to Europe. If you built it someplace else, I'll bet you built it at home. You couldn't find it. But we have to, that's the foundation that we have to come with. Because there has been an attempt to emasculate our people.
Yes.
To put, as we say in the Caribbean, to throw dust in our face, in our eyes, so that we can see clearly. And part of us seeing clearly is for us to unlearn. Yes. So the message which we have to send to the young generation, those who are coming up and those who are yet unborn, is that Africa-centered education is fundamental to the advancement and liberation of African people and the liberation of the African continent. Because without that, we would all think that our salvation is bound up with being in New York or in London or Amsterdam, and not in Accra and Addis Ababa and Johannesburg or Cairo. Because Africa has some of the brightest minds. In fact, the African-American education specialist, Jawanza Kanjufu, says that African children are born at genius level, but that the education system that they go through, by the time they get to 10, 11, they are dumbed down.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have to build up our own education system and our own network, so that our system will not, our children will not become contaminated with negative, destructive ideas.
That's right. That's right.
So we have to build a new consciousness, because it is that consciousness that will take us to another point. And it is much more difficult than I am articulating it. Because there are so many forces that are going to come at us. If you look now at what is happening under the whole question of critical race theory, and all the critical race theory says is that there has been an imbalance in the learning, and that imbalance is an imbalance which weighs heavily towards Europe and Europe's contribution in the world, and that we need to balance the scales and to put the contribution of all other peoples. But white supremacy don't like that. So they are now attacking forcefully critical race theory. And this is why we have to get into the trenches and do the necessary defenses for what is that armor that we have to build around ourselves. And that armor could only come through education and consciousness. So I am very, very optimistic that we are going to do this. I think we have the resources. I think we have the mental and intellectual power to do it. I think we have a growing young cadre of young people who are committed to doing it. And we have to spend our rest days here doing our best to ensure that we train even more cadre, that we teach even more young people so that they would take that to, because this reparations fight, this fight for African liberation is a marathon. We need the Usain Bolts. We need the young lady, the Jamaican young lady who won the 100 and 200 meters, Miss Hirab. We need all of those. But you know what? We need the Gabriel Selassies, and we need all of those other brothers from Kenya and so on who run that long race. Because this race is not for the swift. This race is for those who can endure to the end. And once we come with that commitment and we do the kind of things that we need to do, we're going to get to the mountaintop. And once we get there, we will be able to march on the promised land.
Hey, Ashe. Let me bring in Brother Michael. Brother Michael, my apologies. I think we missed you on one of the rounds. I've been getting told off in the chat. They want to hear from you, my brother. Let's hear from you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think Brother Abu and Jomo, as well as Brother Sakir, lynched it when Brother Jomo and Brother Abu in particular, who spoke about our addiction to white privilege, which is another way I presume he means we're addicted to white supremacy, consciously or unconsciously. And you see, if we are clear on the need to end white supremacy, then what that implies is that we are developing our minds to be emancipated from mental slavery. And if our minds are being emancipated from mental slavery, one of the things that must evolve from that emancipation is a vision for freedom, a vision as to how we're going to reconstruct the colonial and neo-colonial societies that the European enslavers have left for us, and that imperialism continues to impose on us. And so if we have a vision, and Sakia referenced this earlier, if we have a vision, then development as a pursuit is going to come clearer and clearer as to what we need to do. If we have a vision to develop the Caribbean societies, then one of the things that is going to imply is that we will know how we are going to utilize our domestic resources to achieve development, by which I mean the backward-forward linkages between the different sectors of our economy, where the output of agriculture, for example, pineapples and what have you, bananas, and so on, can become inputs into the manufacturing sector so that we can expand wealth creation and employment, and, as they like to say, value added, domestically. But here's another thing. If we have a vision about how we want to reconstruct our societies, then we will be in a position to utilize our brain power, our people who migrated to the metropolitan societies. Okay, we want an agricultural economist. Well, we have several of them in New York City or UK. We want some physicians. We can give them short-term contracts or even long-term contracts to come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to go to Jamaica, Barbados, etc. And they can help us to develop a healthcare strategy. So vision is critical. We can even develop alliances with foreign capital, not on their terms, but on our terms, so that we can develop sectors that have been lagging. There are a range of things that we can do if we have a vision. Our African foreparents had a vision for tens of thousands of years before the European barbarians invaded Africa. Okay? And they were self-sufficient in food, in clothing, etc. They didn't have the diseases that we are having now, etc. We can learn a lot from history. That's what a vision is about. And without a vision, people perish. In fact, the Jamaican anthem states that clearly. That is why when we go on a flight, you would never go on a flight where the pilot does not tell you what is the navigation plan. That's a vision. You'll never go on a cruise ship if you don't know what the navigation plan is. Well, similarly, societies need plans. And in those plans are embodied the vision. Where do we want to take our societies? Where do we want to take our people?
And may I say, the very fact that we're discussing this issue, we have taken the reparation movement to that level, right? The reparation movement have begun to evolve. People begin to see the different needs and the complexity of these issues. And many of us are questioning, well, can we even tolerate for a moment to talk about a reparation program where the capital, for example, returned back to the metropolis? Is that reparation? No, it's not. Reparation is about transformation. We have to, as you said, my sister, how do we transform our society, become a livable society, the continent and the diaspora? How do we build? Michael is talking about the vision. How do we have a vision that all of the skills that we have that is wasted because of white supremacy in this society can go back to Africa and the Caribbean and be utilized effectively? I mean, some of our best brains, some of our best brains from the continent and the Caribbean are in these countries. Absolutely. Being wasted. So how do we utilize, how people are prepared and will be prepared to make the sacrifice if they see that vision, knowing that the society is going to transform into something else? So I am confident that that will happen. I'm confident that many of the, Joma made a very brilliant point. Are we going to begin to envision of a world with European thoughts? How are we going to have an African-centered vision, a view of the world, of ourselves, our brothers and sisters? And many reparation activists, that's perhaps where we need to start, because many of us talk about reparation, but we don't practice it. Reparation become active when you begin to live it. Reparation activists must begin to start to live the world you want to see tomorrow, not when it comes.
Rise up, Brother Michael and Brother Sekaya. Let's bring in Dr. Abu. Dr. Abu, there's been quite a lot of response to your opening remarks. What say you? Back to the comments. Please unmute yourself. Let's hear from you, my brother.
Vudum family. Well, you asked what to leave with the generation, the next generation. First, we have to come out of denial. I am recovering from white privilege addiction, because every test that we do in life is to please white people. Them said, consciousness is awareness. What to pay attention to is what to become conscious of. And for 500 years, a lot of us are going to pay attention to European. You know, I have to tell my great-grandchildren, yeah, the truth. I have to tell my great-grandchildren that from the day these a certain European tribe come in Africa, they've been terrorizing the world. And we are living in a state of horror. Every day, African people is living a life of horror. And we can't deny it. These are things that we must not deny to the generation. Family is very important. We must talk to our children that they don't get engrafted in other families. Because this is the part of the addiction that we love to mash up with family and then go engraft in other family and call that prosperity. Not a prosperity that is crawling back on the plantation. We got to let go certain things. This our father where we are walk with from the day we walk off of the plantation, we have to let it go. Because our father in Latin means brought to punishment. That's why your mother said, wait until your father come. You understand? And we've been calling upon this, and calling upon this. What we need to leave with the next generation is to make them know that when I said, our Father who art in heaven, I know that he's with Mama. Because all of us come from that beautiful heaven. You understand? And we're not going to wait until we're dead to go find no heaven. We have to be real. We got to be real with ourselves and start to run with our own narrative. The only thing we can leave with the next generation is the truth. Nothing more. You give them the truth and they will find their way. Vodum family all the time.
Vodum, rise up, Dr. Abu. We've got to run with the truth. We were talking earlier about the need for the Usain Bolts and other athletes in terms of our rapid industrialization and development on the continent. We're also talking about our vision for the 22nd century. And, there is the Rapid Africa Plan that does lay out for us a vision for an industrialized and a technologically advanced Mama Africa. And I've also heard a couple of references to what has been termed white supremacy and how to end it. And I think we can start ending white supremacy by firstly not giving them that title of being supreme to us. They are not white supremacy. If words sound power, words are powerful, and if we're going to be calling a people and saying that they're more supreme, that's suggesting that we're inferior. Because supremacy, if we look that up, I suppose it's going to mean that it's higher than, better than, and the reverse of that is that the other group would be inferior. So we need to drop that term. I know it's been coined in the academic world, but that doesn't mean that we will have to subscribe to it. We need to debate it, discuss it, and have our own definition and terminology. I've heard, more appropriate descriptions: European barbarism, European terrorism, or white terrorism, because that is certainly what we have been experiencing for the last 500 years. Terror. Dr. Abu describes it as a living horror. It's like we're in a horror movie for what we have been experiencing as a people. And then ones who haven't experienced what we've experienced want to turn around and say that we don't deserve to get any reparations. So clearly, what's been talked about as well is the kind of knowledge that we have, the brain power that we have, the intellectual capacity that we have as Africans during these times, and that we need to utilize that as well in terms of research and development so that we can advise the generation coming up and download this information into them. Even if we have to do that and ought to be doing it anyway in our homes, because it may not be tomorrow that we get our own African-centered education system so that we can be raising the conscious level of our people. So, as Dr. Abu was saying, for the last 500 years, almost everything that we have been conditioned into doing has been for the benefit of the Europeans and not for the benefit of us as Africans. All of the studying that we do is to benefit Europe. All of the the certificates, the qualifications that we sit and we study is to maintain the status quo, the same systems that are oppressing us. We are studying, how to participate in our own demise. And until we recognize and come to a level of consciousness that the only way that we're going to defeat the system that we're in is to withdraw from it to the extent that we're not actually facilitating, its continued position in this society, then we will be in a better position as Africans. And, right across the board, just to say that we do need our own intelligence systems in every sector of society. We've got the brains, as has been suggested, but we need to have our own intelligence society so that, in terms of the technology, we've got our African intelligentsia there who can advise, African governments or African private sector formations about how we could be advancing technologically. We've got our scientific intelligence, our military intelligence, in every sector, in the medical fraternity, biological fraternity, we need our own intelligence so that we are utilizing some of that brain capacity and power that we have towards our own development as a people. And we're not just putting all of our energy and efforts into maintaining a system that is, not for us as a people. So in terms of visioning and how we go forward without this, so-called white supremacy, we can drop that title here and now. Let's go around the room and hear what our guests have to say about dropping that title and having a more appropriate title, that's based on our experience, which is European barbarism, European, genocidal, mistreatment or maniacs or, hey, come on, let's go over to some of our academics on this. This time, first of all, let me bring in Brother Michael. I caught you by surprise there.
Right, you did. Okay, that's fine. The term white supremacy, as we all know, is somewhat deeply entrenched in our people's minds. They're accustomed to that terminology, and that terminology is used quite a lot. So I'm not sure how we can stop using it, so to speak. What we can do for sure is to use alternative terminologies like European terrorism, European barbarism, as synonyms for white supremacy, so that our people are on the same page with us in understanding that we are talking about the same ideological phenomenon that demeans our people, belittles our people, consider our people inferior to them physically, mentally, intellectually, and otherwise. And so that we can mobilize our people's energies and their organizational capacities to actually end the structures of oppression and racism that European barbarism, European terrorism, white supremacy have imposed on our peoples. One of the things that commonly a white person, even some of the most liberal ones in this country, and I'm sure in the UK and elsewhere, will say, you know, oh, I'm so sorry about the Africans. You know, you see them, they're so poor. And you'd have to explain to them that no, our people are not poor. Our people are made poor. And they are made poor by the economic, political, and ideological systems that impose these structures of oppression on them. And so this is where I'm going with all of that. I believe, and I think it was Brother Jomo and Sakia who referenced this earlier, that when we talk about the struggle for reparations, if we are not committed to using those resources in whatever form it comes, cash payments or grants or whatever other kinds of modality, to transform our societies, to benefit Afro-descendants in particular at the very bottom of the society, and indigenous people as well, then we would have failed our younger generations and we would have failed ourselves. But most importantly, in many ways, I think we would have failed our enslaved ancestors who went through so much pain and suffering. If we don't use reparations to transform our societies so that we have better healthcare services for Afro-descendants, high quality education, that we end illiteracy, etc. And so that raises, and I'm going to stop at this point so that the other brothers can comment and elaborate on this. A big question then becomes, can we transform our societies with reparation resources within the capitalist framework, within the international capitalist system, or do we have to go outside of it, like the Cuban people have done, and like the Asian people attempted in 1804, actually did it. And now they are facing all these repercussions, all these blows, blockades and sanctions and so on. Are we going to allow these costs to intimidate us, not to transform our societies, to benefit those at the very bottom who have always suffered the pangs of underdevelopment? That, I think, is a central question. Can we transform our societies adequately enough to benefit the broadest majority of Afro-descendants within the capitalist system? Or will we have to end the capitalist system or transform ourselves structurally outside of it to improve the lot of the ordinary folks, despite the repercussions that will inevitably come from imperialism? Because for me, in closing, the struggle for reparations is inevitably an anti-imperialist struggle. It cannot be otherwise, because if you think about it, the former colonizer countries, Britain, France, etc., they are all now imperialist countries. So we have to confront the structures of imperialism in transforming our societies. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Brilliant, brilliant question. I wish we had more time, to address that question, my brother. Wow, wow, wow. Let me go over to Dr. Abu. Dr. Abu, we're going around for closing remarks now. We're 10 minutes away from the top of the hour. Dr. Abu, wow. What would your response be to Brother Michael or to any of the comments in the chat that you might want to pick up on. Please unmute yourself, my brother, and let's hear from you.
Well, give thanks, Sister Shanice. You know, all I want to say is a pleasure meeting the brother. And I hope we can continue to be critical thinker amongst ourselves. You know, we communicate with one another, and we can solve our problem. You understand? We can solve our problem if we put our mind to it. Ashe, Buddha.
Ashe. Wow, we can solve our problems. So you would err on the side, therefore, I think that we transform ourselves irrespective of the repercussions, because, you know, I see that there would be repercussions probably in the short term, but in the long term, you know, it would be to our benefit. To be able to operate independently. You know, Zimbabwe was, I think, mentioned as an example there. We've seen them come with the sanctions and the terror tactics. We've seen what's happened to people like President Magufuli, the president of Burundi, the president of the Ivory Coast, the attempts on people like Madagascar, what's happened to the president of Haiti, those who want to try and do it, you know, for the Africans in their own way. So, you know, in terms of the work that would need to be done to make sure that we've got our intelligence in place so that we can defend ourselves against the inevitable repercussions would have to be essential. But let me allow Brother Sakaya and Brother Jomo to give us some concluding remarks on today's discussion. Rise up, Brother Sakaya.
Yep, well, Michael have posed the quintessential question that we need to begin to ponder on in terms of the next stage of the reparation agenda. And I like the fact that he have cited the example of Cuba, a country that have had to endure 60-odd years of embargo. But look at what that embargo have done and how it brought out the creativity of the people.
Yes.
Look at how it has brought out the creativity of people where, and again, whether or not you believe, I want to use the vaccine example, whether or not you believe it, yes or no, that's not the point. The point is here's a relatively underdeveloped country that have done its research and development to manufacture a vaccine that even the most ardent anti-vaccine who don't want to support vaccine will say, I will try the Cuban vaccine. Why? Is it because the Cuban scientists...
We mustn't use that word too much, otherwise this show will be taken down.
No, I'm just saying. I'm just using that to illustrate the point.
Yeah, call it the V. Call it the jab. Don't use the...
Okay, the jab.
Yeah.
I'm using the Cuban example.
Yes.
That here's a country that have been able to do this research and development to the point where it can compete against some of the most powerful countries in spite of. So the question Michael asked, can this be done? It can be done, but at a price. But are we prepared to sacrifice? No, I don't know any African person anywhere in the world who have had a sacrifice. Even some of our most backward Caribbean leaders, if you think of the time of independence, if you look at people like Gordon Lewis' works, Gordon Lewis will show you what the British left in the English-speaking Caribbean is absolutely nothing. And some of those backward leaders who could have done a better job have not done such a bad job in many respects. And I'm saying this to say that we have always made sacrifice and struggle. No, the question is, how do we analyze their weakness, what they have gained and the weakness, and how do we analyze and build on that? How do we put in place mechanism to ensure that that's what happened to Haiti, what's happening to Cuba, what's happening to the leaders they're assassinating? How can we coalesce our forces to build up a mechanism around that? White supremacy must be seen as...
Oh, we're going to drop that term.
No, it must be seen as an opponent in the boxing ring. It must be seen as an opponent in the boxing ring.
I like that.
Where Muhammad Ali gets in. And Muhammad is going to tell you how great he is. And he's going to knock you out. So that is how we must begin to view white supremacy. It's an opponent that must be destroyed. And if we looked, I really understood white supremacy when Henry Beckles talked about the 1661 slave code. If you look at Hillary's work of what happened around it, you begin to see the emergent, the genesis of white supremacy and why it can be defeated and why it will be defeated and why reparation is the answer to defeat that.
Rise up, why white terrorism will be defeated.
It will be.
We've got to see white terrorism as the
It's all of the above,
opponent.
my sister. It's all of the above.
As the opponent.
All of the above.
Let's hear some closing words from our brother Jomo. Rise up all the way from St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Well, after what I've just heard, as closers, I don't know how I can close on that.
Oh, our brother has frozen. Oh dear. Until he comes back. And also apologies from Sister Sheila, who was unable to return because of the poor connection that she had out in the countryside here in the UK, believe it or not. So yeah, there we go. The UK isn't all that in a bag of chips as it tries to make out. Our brother Jomo is back. Welcome back, my brother.
I think the technology wanted to have the last word.
Yes, I think so.
But look, I think the questions which all of the brothers before me raised are fundamental questions. But I have to agree with Mike that I don't see how we are going to get to reparations in a real way, in a sustainable way, without confronting head-on the economic structures in the society. Because as he correctly said, the former enslaving powers are the current imperialist powers. So the fight against imperialism has to be the fight that will take us closer to African redemption. Because it is only by defeating imperialism, it is only by defeating imperialism would we be able to defeat neocolonialism. And by defeating those twin systems of oppression, I think we would be making room for the liberation of our people. And I don't think that I need to say anything else. Everything else was said more eloquently by the brothers who came before me.
Thank you so much. To all the panel members, I want to thank you so much for joining us in our discussion today. Dr. Abu, Brother Sikaya, Brother Jomo, Brother Michael, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. To everyone in the chat that has been contributing to the discussion and the debate, thank you so much. Please do continue with the conversation in your family. We all need to be having these discussions. You know, what are the messages that we want to be sending to our great-grandchildren, the ones who may well be the inheritance of whatever we put in place today? Let's make sure that we're doing the work to make life easier for them so that they can be in a more prosperous position mentally, psychologically, economically, politically, etc., etc. So this is the Sister Shanice show. Out of here for now. All being well, we'll be back next Wednesday with another exciting and interesting topic for us to discuss. Rise up, family. Stay strong, stay powerful. One love.